Hello, everybody. Welcome, everybody, to React Wednesdays. My name is TJ Van Tol. I work as a developer advocate at Progress. With me, as always, Dan Wilson. Dan, how you doing?
Hey, I'm Dan Wilson, and I work with Digital Primates, and we do enterprise React consulting, and we curate the enterprise React newsletter, which is how we found out about Fred.
Cool. So this is React Wednesdays. If you're new here, this is a stream we do every week. And basically, the idea is we bring in cool people from around the React world. We have them show us something interesting. So in a minute here, we're going to welcome Fred Schott, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I forgot to ask him that beforehand, to talk about Snowpack. But I did want to mention quickly, we have some other shows coming up in April. We have one with Stefan Baumgartner about TypeScript and dynamic types, which should be interesting because I'm awful at dynamic types and TypeScript. We've got a show about React context and some advanced use cases of that, so that should be pretty interesting. And Paul, damn these names, Paul Henschel. Hoping I got that right. Henschel, I think that's Henschel. Like about React 3 Fiber, which I'm very excited about that because that's any of these sort of like cool animations with React, I always find super fascinating. So interesting stuff. But today we're going to be talking about Snowpack. And first I want to welcome back, I should say, from Progress, Kirill Piansky. Kirill, how you doing?
Hello, guys. Nice to be back in the show, actually. So for those of you who do not know me, I'm Kirill, and I'm full-time time zones hater and part-time developer at Can Do React. We do React UI components, and that's about me.
Cool. And then our special guest today to talk about Snowpack, I'm going to welcome in Fred. And is it Fred Schott? Did I get it correctly?
Perfectly.
Yes. All right.
Not everyone does. A lot of Scotts, a lot of Schotts, weirdly.
Nice. So Fred, you want to tell people who you are, what you do, and maybe also what Snowpack is?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited to be here. Yeah, Snowpack is a build tool at its kind of most basic. So if you use webpack or a Create React app today, it's essentially an alternative to that. But we do a lot of really interesting stuff that kind of changes the foundation of how this tool works. So for you, the end result is it's another way to build your site. But the end result is that you have a dev environment that essentially updates immediately. The dev server starts immediately. If you've ever had to like wait for Webpack to get started or wait for anything really during development, Snowpack gets rid of that. So essentially 0 millisecond updates. You're building files individually. It's a really efficient workflow for web development that we've developed.
So I know we're going to get into the technical stuff, but I first have to ask, where did the name Snowpack come from?
A really dumb, not even a joke would be too kind. No, Webpack was the original incarnation, and then Snowpack. If you just say it really quick.
Well, there's two things that are hard: cache and validation, and naming things. There you go.
Well, then I doubled down on it and created a different project called Skypack, which we can talk about. It's not directly related, but obviously, really now just mixing this pack analogy about as far as it goes.
So I'm curious where the sort of inspiration to create this come from. Did you work on a project that had an especially like slow Webpack build process? Like, what was the actual inspiration to go forth and create this?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much every project I've worked on before this, I've had a slow Webpack build process. There's just like a lot that Webpack does. It's not really a fault of the tool. It's doing everything it's supposed to do, but what I realized and what this project really existed to kind of explore was the even idea of bundling during development kind of deserved to be challenged. It really came out of a requirement, a technical requirement of how NPM was designed and how Node was designed, and then how front-end development kind of took Node and took NPM and ran with it. There were these really, really awesome things that like the whole NPM ecosystem is huge. It's this huge like productivity booster. But there was this almost like implicit agreement that came with that, which is that by using NPM, you need to bundle during development. And Browserify was the first, but then Webpack, and then Roll, like this all came out of this requirement that came with using NPM. So superpower, obviously, but there was this technical implication there that bundling existed to solve. And that's essentially why we all live in a world where bundling was seen as the default. Yeah, Snowpack really existed to challenge that idea and kind of take a modern approach to that question.
So I think my last question, then I kind of want to see some of this in action, is have you been surprised by how well the project has been received? Because I feel like I'm starting to hear about Snowpack like all the time now, right? It's really gotten some popularity. Were you surprised by that? Did you think you sort of had like a niche, or did it come at you by surprise?
It's been like a surprisingly long road to get here. This existed as a project called Pico Web, which I think almost no one actually tried themselves.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we started this project called Pico, which was like an umbrella, almost like research project to explore ESM. So this could be a good reason to just share my screen. I can
we could use this as good transition.
And some of us at Progress were already taking a look at Pika.
Were you really? Oh, that is so cool. That is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of like, it was very like niche in that it,
What time frame are we talking about here?
Well, we can see the Pico website is still, it really only exists to kind of highlight these two projects now that we've really focused on. But it still kind of exists as our
place for people to go once they find you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, yep. It still exists almost as like the conceptual. I won't dig into it, but there's this kind of like conceptual pitch that if we can like leverage ESM, we can make the web a lot faster. And Pika really existed to do that. This page is really outdated now, but you can still see like early December 2018. There's a cute little mouse, a kind of nauseating logo that I went with. I'm not my design skills are about as good as my skills.
The mouse is good though.
Yeah. Oh, there's a trick to that too. You can even see a little similarity design-wise. I basically stole the Twitter emoji for mouse and then recolored it. So yeah, clearly some stuff going on there. But I can show quick if I switch my here. ESM is essentially the syntax that we're pretty much mostly using as a community right now. So like import, foo from bar.js. Right, that idea of like import, and then I want to like export a function, foobar. That import and export keyword as a way to define a module in JavaScript. That was really the technology that Pika kind of existed to explore, and then Snowpack came out of that as a way to do web development that really leveraged this syntax. So when I mentioned that like Node and NPM had this like technical limitation that required bundling, that was really that they were using CommonJS. So CommonJS being the kind of previously on web development, which is the require function. Oh, hello. So if before you would do require.bar, or you do like module.exports equals, and whatever you want. That syntax was the Node.js syntax, and that's really terrible for web development. Like there's this function call, it's going to go do something like over the network, your browser that has to like stop everything and go and check for this file. And like, what if you did this, which is technically valid in Node? Like all of these decisions that Node made that were great for Node were actually terrible for web development. And as a result, that's why bundling kind of came in, was to handle this for web development.
Part of me thinks that unfortunately at the moment, there's a bit more familiarity with Webpack than Snowpack. Is it fair for you to walk through some of the similarities and differences?
Yeah. Let me even just show a kind of starter project, because the technical, like the foundation is we use this new syntax, but like, what does that mean? There's some really cool stuff that we can do by essentially really leveraging this. So as long as you're writing ESM, you're using imports and exports, which most people are already doing in their own code, you can actually like leapfrog over the status quo of tools that need to deal with this and are thinking in this world. Yeah, let me just, I'll jump right into an example.
Yeah, and I just have it said that Fred's the kind of guy that types his slides out as he's talking. Like that's pretty impressive.
Oh, you should see, I use VS Code for note taking. It is pretty harrowing in terms of organization, but yeah, I'm a pretty power VS Code user. So create Snowpack app is like the way that we would say you can kind of get started. It's a bunch of starter templates. You can kind of see a bunch of different things here, React and React TypeScript. Do y'all have a preference? JavaScript, TypeScript? Has the podcast taken a side on this yet?
I think we've come down on the TypeScript side of things.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, we love everybody, but TypeScript.
Yeah, we're fans of it at Progress as well. So, and is this for so this is creating a brand new app and not adding Snowpack to an existing app, correct?
Yeah, we can talk about that story in a little bit, but right now I'm just basically going to copy this example
Gotcha.
and start a new template from scratch. It's probably the easiest way to just show what happens here.
Yep.
So we're going to create a React Wednesday demo directory, and we're going to use what template did we say? React TypeScript. So kind of cobble this together a bit, but create Snowpack app, and you just choose your template. So this is a kind of one-stop shop for starting a new project. And what this does, it essentially takes a repo that we have where these all live. It downloads that repo and that template. It runs your npm install and kind of just like sets the directory up for you.
And these are community maintained, because I imagine because I could see like this being somewhat of a maintenance nightmare, considering you have to these templates have to have versions of React and Vue and all of that. Does the community help you maintain all of these things?
Yeah, so we maintain these ones officially, and it's actually a really nice way to make sure that we have a good first class experience, a really clear almost like a testing, they're essentially all integration tests on their own. So we actually get a lot out of maintaining these ourselves, but there's plenty of different ways to connect different tools. Part of the being a build tool is everyone wants to connect different things. So we try and just let the community come with their custom things as well.
Yeah, that's funny. Most tools you want to avoid this situation, but I guess that makes sense as a build tool. People are using you for that, so you kind of can't shy away from it.
Yep, exactly. So we now have this directory. You can kind of actually, let me see if this works. I'm going to try and switch. Aha, okay, now we're in the directory. This will be a little bit better. So all we've really done is we've created a source directory for you with some basic kind of if you use create React app, I'll show you this in a second. Maybe I'll even just start the app so y'all can see this in action. So the first thing you'll notice right here is we have this kind of first run step. We say that we're instant dev server, but now, okay, all of a sudden what just happened, that wasn't really instant. There's this idea of npm, remember I talked about being this technical limitation that requires bundling. So what we did was we said, okay, I'm going to write my app using ESM, and I'll just have this way to handle packages. I'll essentially bring bundling at the package level in a way that is totally invisible to the user. And then now everything, my whole application is ESM. So even though React is this older format, what Snowpack's going to do is behind the scenes update it to ESM so that your whole application is this ESM thing. So what's really nice about this is a first-time, one-time cost that you have to pay. In Webpack, every time you hit save, you're rebundling, configuring your app and restitching things together. But in Snowpack, it's a one-time, essentially, build for your dependencies. So we ran this, ready. Okay, now we jump to the server start time. You can see really quick start time here. But if we go, any time in the future where you run npm start, we essentially start up instantly.
Well, and you said also that first run wasn't instant, but compared to your normal create React app, it certainly felt instant to me.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting part of this conceptually, which it's kind of hard to show in a starter example like this, but it's a good way to kind of show what is the superpower of ESM when I say we get to use some superpowers here. The reason we start up so quickly is that Snowpack only builds the files that are requested by the browser. So we have this really nice performance story for large apps, especially where in a traditional create Webpack app or any Webpack-based bundling app, your bundler is essentially having to go out and build your site almost entirely, at least in some ways. Every file that you add builds that complexity and builds that save time, that startup time, because you're bundling. So you kind of need to bundle the whole thing. But what we do is that essentially we start your dev server and then it's the browser kicking off these requests. Okay, give me your app.js, give me your dependency. And as the app loads, we are kicking off these builds almost on demand. So you could have a 100,000 file project if you wanted to. We're only ever actually going to build the files that you request in the browser. So it scales really nice to huge projects.
Yeah, I'm trying to think through how that works. I mean, in my pea brain that hasn't built this, you've got to somehow bottleneck everything through a thing that Snowpack controls and then make choices of what to build there. But
yeah, so
I'm curious.
So I can tell you a bit of how this works in the network. Because again, what a traditional bundled app is going to have, it's going to say okay, great, here's my index, .html, and it's pointing to a bundle, and that's going to kick off everything. But oh god, this is not a lot of screen real estate. I might just pop this out so we can see.
Yeah,
it looks pretty good.
So you can actually see there's some stuff for metadata stuff that we're creating, but you can actually see every file is being loaded individually. So there's a couple of things here. We have your end variables. You're what mode are we living in? If I wanted to set some keys or environment variables, Your dependencies are being loaded one-off, which we can talk about. Your actual app.typescript file is now a single app.js. So we have this really nice story where essentially everything is a one-to-one build. Everything is built essentially as it's requested, and there's no like deep builds that get triggered. There's no like, okay, I have to build this, so build this and build this and build this, and next thing you know, you're waiting for a super long time just to load your index. Instead, every file is served to the browser as a CSM, so the browser actually understands, hey, okay, this is the app.js. It took, how long on its first build? Why is there no time here? Let's see, time. 12 milliseconds to build. Now I'm telling the browser, okay, great. And then also I need these files. So it's those imports in the file here, which you can kind of see that are then triggered the browser to go and then fetch the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
Is that base script even like, is it a script tag with type equals module or?
Yeah, so we can jump into even here. So this follows a similar approach to a create React app or a, one of these, like you have your source directory for your JavaScript and public just for like assets. And it's your index.html here, which essentially says, just give me the kind of final built thing.
Okay.
Type module dist index. This concept looks like we just made up like, what is dist index? I thought you said that this is a one-to-one thing. We can get into the mounting, but essentially what we've told the browser is like this source directory is going to end up at a dist like location. So in the final build, at the actual route /dist, and then index being the built version of this file, which is your kind of root node. So the setup is like basically like give us an HTML file, point to the final destination of this, which is an index.js file when it gets built, and then we will now trigger your application building.
Are there any concerns with browser support with type module, or are those concerns now gone? Am I dating myself too much?
They still exist, but they're really going away in the next like couple of months. I think there's a really like IE11 is essentially the last browser that we really need to worry about, and that is dropped below 1% usage globally. I think by some estimates, Microsoft is pushing people off of it in their own products. The government now is able to like stop supporting it. Like the time is kind of running out for IE11.
Yeah, WordPress just announced they're getting rid of it in the next version or next version.
Yep, Vue is stopped supporting, or I think they're really trying to push that they don't support it for V3 or going forward. Yeah, the writing's on the wall for IE11, which is really the last holdout. I will say there's an interesting story here, which is that we walk this interesting line. We say that it's a modern dev experience, but then when you go to build your site, you can actually build it using like essentially whatever browser support you want. We still cut that line at ESM, so you can't go back to IE11 without essentially bundling, which we can talk about. But what we try and do is we say like, we're going to give you a modern dev experience because you're probably using a browser for development that's been built in the last 2 years. But we don't say that like, and that means your site has to run on only modern browsers. You can still build this and essentially ship exactly what you're shipping today using your build pipeline to kind of downgrade it and bring in that older browser support.
So files, as they're built, have a one-to-one mapping with the original file. What's actually different?
Different in terms of like what gets built?
Yeah, like how's the file different after you do your process?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. We essentially are trying to bring a modern dev experience where no matter what you're using, React, Svelte, Vue, we're taking that source file, and at the end of the day, it's becoming JavaScript. So that's that idea of this like source index file at the end of the day becomes a JS file. You can see there's a couple of other things that we're doing in here, like we've added some special like essentially data hooks for you so you can load environment variables that I mentioned here. We can talk about some of that. We've added HMR support. That's actually really worth showing off just because it's so cool. What's the best way to show this off? So again, we like speed is totally a priority for us. And so there's this idea here of having not just like React refresh, which is like a super fast HMR, but the idea of like, again, because we're only building this file on change, when you hit save, you're not like, okay, let's rebundle, let's rebuild, let's push updates. We're just only building this one file. So for example, here you can see we have this timer, which is setting the state to +1. Let's just let's start counting backwards instead. So we have React refresh. You can see here that essentially that just loaded a single file. It had to rebuild. It took a little while, but 30 milliseconds was the time from hitting save to getting that update in the browser. And again, that's not something that's like, oh, because it's a small app, like you're just cheating because it's a demo. Like no matter 100,000 files wouldn't have changed that story, that because we're only working with a single file, we hit save, it gets pushed, and the browser updates.
Yeah, and it looks like it also preserved the state of it as well, which is kind of interesting. And is some of this possible because like I'm just trying to think through my brain of how this works, because you're almost like because it's at a module level, is it easier to like hot swap that code in versus like, I don't know, does that question make sense? Because it's sort of blowing my mind, because like, right, like because you take like a chunk of JavaScript and you're updating it, but you're updating only that chunk. Well, the JavaScript environment in the VM, the rest of it sort of stays the same. So I'm like, my head is trying to put together exactly how that happens.
No, it blows my mind as well. This is actually leaning on some really cool stuff from the React team. So React Refresh is actually a project of theirs that essentially lets someone like Snowpack hook into the actual like hooks and the state. Like they essentially provided us a hook to say, hey, this updated. Here's the new code. You stitch this into the React runtime.
Okay, so
we don't actually do that ourselves. We basically defer to what the React team has given us as a hook.
Are there equivalents for other environments? Like, what's your hot refresh story like for Angular and Vue and such?
Yep, I think everyone has some support like this now. So Preact has a project called Prefresh, which is the same thing, Svelte. Basically, like we as a build tool try to copy as much as what Webpack has already kind of created as a model, which is like we will provide hooks for a project to essentially bridge that gap. Like Svelte, only React knows how to update the React state. So we provide the hook, React Refresh is the glue, and you as a developer never need to worry about any of this. That's where that kind of idea of, okay, so if we actually have, let's just load that again. Where did that go? App.js, right? This is essentially what gets added by this package to say, okay, if we're in an HMR environment, which is dictated by like, does this .hot thing exist? Again, the user never had to write this. This is this plugin, this React Refresh plugin that we have, essentially stitching it together, being the glue, and it gets built into every file. So this now understands that when an update comes in, I'm going to register this file and update it myself. The big takeaway is that the user is never writing this. This is purely coming from that plugin. Yeah. So you just get some really nice, zero boilerplate kind of updates.
Yeah, I do want to give Kirill a chance to weigh in. Unfortunately, we can't see him, and so he might have a question at the tip of his tongue.
I do.
Kirill?
I do. Yeah. So, Fred, my question for you is, apart from the development experience, once you bundle your application, how does the final bundle looks? Is your third-party dependency still separated in different files?
Yeah, great question. Let me show you what that kind of build looks like, because we've been looking at the dev server right now, and there's plenty to go through there. But let's say it's like you're ready to build your site. We're just essentially going to run a build script to do that, which is Snowpack build. We in the starter app, we've set it up as a build script in npm, but this is essentially just running Snowpack build. This is really cool. So we'll just like look at this directory for now, although we could certainly serve this and see it running in the browser. This is what we were seeing in the browser, but on the file system. So you have those, remember I mentioned that source directory gets built into a dist directory. So there's that kind of mapping that happens. Right now we have this idea of like a proxy file. So if some CSS file gets loaded inside of JavaScript, like, right, what does this do? We're essentially loading a JavaScript wrapper to kind of stitch those two together. You can't actually import CSS in JavaScript. So we're kind of doing this workaround for you that's like, okay, we're going to give you a CSS file that actually is JavaScript. You can kind of see it here. Like it's JavaScript, but what it's going to do is, essentially stitch some styling together for you. Again, we do all this for you automatically, but what's really interesting about this approach is that our default build is unbundled. So if we actually did go and serve this to the browser, I like to use a project called Server, which is a really cool, like really simple server that has zero dependencies, so it starts up quick. If we actually load this and check out the network panel, this is an unbundled site here. Like it's the same app.js. You can see that HMR code is gone for the updates, but it's essentially every file is getting built individually. Now,
And
what's interesting about that is you can still bundle afterwards if you want, but we're trying to take this actually more conceptual approach here, which is that bundling isn't really required anymore. You can still easily lean into it, which I can show, with a simple kind of flag in your config. But we try and say, like, if you don't really care about bundling, if maybe you just want to get a simple prototype, simple example site, maybe that's just not really on your plate yet. You don't have to jump into this just yet. You can ship something unbundled and then reach for bundling when you care about performance.
Well,
so the reason I'm asking this, I'm sorry, TJ, for interrupting, but I actually have my own argument against bundling, and this is because Google have been more and more strict about their performance requirements for your website, for your web application, and one of those metrics is actually called total blocking time, which is the amount of time a single script takes to execute. And I have previously seen in, for example, a typical webpack application that you have this large vendor.js file, which takes a lot of time, and everything more than 50 milliseconds is Google punishing you. And kudos to you guys, but this is amazing that splitting those third-party dependency into separate scripts, because this really gives a lot of boost, at least in the face of, in the eyes of Google. So this is really nice approach, and
we try to walk that
Okay.
line where we actually, I say your site is unbundled, but some packages like Lodash ships, I think 30, it can't be 30,000. It's like 3,000 or 300. It's a lot of individual files. So yeah, you're trying to walk that line, like unbundled, but to a point. So what we do here, you can kind of see this here. Where's a good example of it? We do bundle up your React dependencies, your third-party packages, because we can't really trust that they were built super efficiently. And this also lets us tree shake them. So you can kind of see here by default, because our example was only using use state and use effect, we've actually tree shaken the rest out of React. So your site's unbundled, but we understand the dependencies are kind of this like really heavy part of your site, and almost assume that in production they'll be tree shaken. So we do some bundling by default, but every package is individual. So yeah, you don't have that vendor is gigantic black box problem.
And is this configurable? Because I could totally see other people saying, like, I want to be unbundled, but like Lodash, like, let's absolutely keep that in like one place. Can you like sort of pick and choose?
You can. So there's a couple of hooks here. The first is like by default, we are going to bundle your dependencies, but leave your site code unbundled. I can show you what the default bundler is really easy to enable. So this is a Snowpack config file. Again, it's a starter application, so we've set up some things for you. You can see us connecting React Refresh for that quick update. It's a .env file for loading those secrets or whatever you need. Some TypeScript support. But we have this optimized config, which is essentially just like bundle equals true. And what we're going to do is we're going to run that through ESBuild. So we actually get to leverage ESBuild. Because we're ESM, we can kind of lean into this more modern tool. Webpack and Rollup are great at handling common JS and legacy code. But because we're saying that we're going to do this final ESM build, we can kind of like get the cool stuff now, which is really cool for your project. So if we rerun your build, it's going to essentially not even really affect performance. Like we essentially bundled in this optimizing step in 0.07 seconds, because ESBuild is just so freaking fast. If we go to serve that though, again, you'll see now this has actually been bundled. So one JS file, one CSS file. If you had more pages, that would obviously be kind of tree shaken and code split a bit more, but we kind of leave it up to you. So there's the extreme of going, I don't care about performance right now. I'm prototyping, I'm building this for my parents. Like, there's plenty of reasons why you might not care about performance. So you can just kind of unbundled with no care for that. Or we try to give this really, really simple bundled story where you don't have a ton of control. You can certainly set a bunch of different options here, but the idea is we kind of like happy path you a bit. We say, we're going to bundle this as efficiently as we know how. And we'll give you some settings, but we're not trying to like create a whole plugin ecosystem around this. But what's cool is that we give you this almost third middle path here, which is that if you really want, you can actually define, you can kind of bring your own bundler and totally script it however you'd like. So this idea of saying plugin Webpack, and there's also a rollup plugin. It's not an official one, so I can't remember what the name is of that. But this gives you full control to bring in Webpack. So, okay, we built the site, it's unbundled, it's ESM. You can now go out of your way to bundle that however you'd like. It's
kind of mind meldy, like But it makes sense, right? Because you might want Snowpack because of the development gains, but you really need something very fine-tuned for your production bundle. So it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it's there. We try to make this, built-in bundler. So you would turn this off then in that case. We want the built-in bundler to be like the 90% of users are happy with the story. And then if you have a really custom use case, we also let you kind of go wild. Like the middle path is totally open-ended. It's one of the really nice things about what we're doing conceptually, which is we're saying, we're not a bundler, we're a build tool, but the role of bundling is shifting. It's not actually, it doesn't have to be this essential thing that everything is built on top of. Instead, it is an optimization, and you can treat it like an optimization. You can plug and play it. You can switch it out. It's just an optimization.
Interesting point.
So this is fascinating to me. So a couple other questions. Do you have to be, because you're using things like ESBuild, do you have to be concerned about dependencies that are built with like CommonJS?
Yeah, that's a really interesting line that we're trying to draw. Again, it's kind of why we're able to use ESBuild as your bundler, is because we've already done the work ahead of time to take care of legacy dependencies. So you can see kind of in the...
Oh, that's right. Okay.
So it's not there. But if we turn this off, we turn bundling off. Let's get rid of this.
I see. So basically the magic of, because you're doing this almost like pre-processing on things, it enables all this later stuff more or less.
Yeah, so you can see here we have React DOM. What's interesting is we're trying to draw this line. We see everything probably moving to more of an ESBuild model eventually, but ESBuild's still really young. It's a very new product, or project rather. And its support for these legacy packages is still not really there. Kind of because, like, what is a legacy package? It's just kind of whatever Webpack supported. Like, warts and all, there's a bug in Webpack. That is now a like standard behavior of NPM.
It's enshrined. Yeah.
It is now, yeah, it's like, it's canon essentially. So we actually use rollup to handle our dependencies. Oh, shit, go ahead.
From the audience.
Oh, yeah. Christian had a question. So are there any issues, gotchas, with the Snowpack rebuild, redeploy strategy with impure modules, e.g. module as singleton?
Yeah, so I think this was asked while we were talking, was like, is it that easy? Like, is it easier with ESM to do something like HMR? It's actually harder. What's nice about the Webpack model, one of the things that they get is they own the runtime, right? So like essentially what you're doing is shipping a Webpack application to the browser means Webpack owns module loading, it owns the whole thing. What we're doing is we're leaning on the browser saying, okay, no, the browser can own this now. But that means that we're kind of limited by what the browser supports. There isn't really the idea of like fully replacing a module in ESM and in the browser. We kind of have to load a second one, and then you provide the hooks for like, how does that get replaced? For most files, that's not an issue. It's, you can easily load a second or a third copy of something stateless. But if there's a singleton, something that is a little tricky, you kind of do have to be careful of that. So you can see here, we have this idea, right, of like what it means to hook into HMR. This is a really basic one. We're basically saying because React Refresh gives us so much for free, we just have to basically say like, I'm enabled, like I support HMR. But this can be taken much more. I think, again, I use it so infrequently, I don't actually remember, but yeah, TypeScript gives us a little something. You basically can define how you update. So this will actually get back the like updated module, and then it's up to you to kind of stitch it into your app. Again, most users never need to worry about this, but if you have something that's like kind of stateful, impure, this can be the hook for you to do that.
I see you also support Svelte, and we don't need to dig too far into that, but is what you're doing with Svelte conceptually similar? And if so, what are the differences?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's very conceptually similar. It follows that same one-to-one build. Again, instead of like a TSX or a JSX, they have .svelte. So same idea. There's a Svelte plugin which takes a Svelte file and tells Snowpack what to do with it, and builds it into a JavaScript file. What's interesting about Svelte is, unlike React, which says, we don't really. React says that CSS isn't our problem, right? They say like, you figure out your own CSS issues. We don't want to get involved, is essentially the React stance, rightly or wrongly. But Svelte is very much like, no, like give us your CSS. We're going to create some Svelte magic for you to stitch it all together. So what's interesting is your built Svelte file actually becomes two things, a JavaScript file and a CSS file. But Snowpack handles that to make sure that it all plays nicely together.
And then did you have to re-implement hot module reload for Svelte, or are you wrapping something from Svelte land?
Yeah, the Svelte community has their version of React Refresh. So it's called Svelte Hot maybe, or Svelte HMR. There's one person in the Svelte community named Rixo, R-I-X-O, who is like an HMR guru. And they created a bunch of different projects for Snowpack and Rollup for using HMR with Svelte. So yeah, similar level of support where if you make a change, it preserves the state.
There's no end, it seems, of smart people in tech doing cool things.
Yeah, we're very lucky. We're on the shoulders of giants for a lot of these things.
And you know what I like about this industry? You get to see other people's work. Like, you don't have to like hide it behind some confidentiality. You can just say, hey, look what I did. And people are like, wow, that's really neat.
To show, I don't know if this is actually this might be in a next support. So this will be kind of the cool, like, where are we going from here part of the story. Let me see. I think TypeScript will tell me if this is supported. That's not. Okay.
Call it Code It Live because we're coding it live.
So I'm going to do. Okay, we're getting into the world of like, if this breaks,
Oh yeah, well that's part of the fun, right?
Yeah, this is very active development. But I'll show you some of the cool stuff again when you start to lean on ESM like this. This has got to update. All right, let's see if this happens. Source. Aha, okay. So we have this thing called Remote Next, which I want to show you all because it's really cool. So one of the things, we have these different configurations, and the basic way that Snowpack works is that it loads your dependencies from your node modules directory. So again, we're not trying to change the world overnight. We're going to fit into your dev environment and your dev experience however you like. But V3 of Snowpack, our last major release, released this new idea as an experiment, which was, what if we could actually load your dependencies from other places, like a CDN? And Skypack, that other project I mentioned, is essentially an ESM CDN. So you can load any package by URL and actually get back the built response. You can almost think of it like hosted Snowpack. So we launched with this experimental idea of, can you load your dependencies from a CDN? And instead of building them locally, just like fetch them. And you skip the whole package install, you skip the whole, downloading and managing and NPM installing. We're now working on a new version of that, which is essentially the same idea of streaming packages. So to show this off a little bit, I think I can just rerun this. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, and I have a question later about how the heck, because this is a professional show, we'll say heck, how the heck can you provide a free CDN? That's pretty impressive.
You'd be surprised. It's not that difficult. CDNs are, especially with Cloudflare, essentially free. A lot of the work goes into developing it, but actually, because it's packages from the community, they really don't change that often. It really just gets cached really nicely.
Back in my day, we used to use this thing called Akamai, which I think is a French word for really expensive, and so it just still blows my mind.
Yeah, even the idea, right? This is cheap and easy for a global CDN is a sign of the times. No, I don't mean to diminish the work put into it, but
of course not. Yeah.
The price, like the actual cost, is actually fairly low to serve assets that are easily cacheable.
This is fascinating to me, by the way, because I see a lot of potential for this, because there's lots of companies that store their own dependencies somewhere, and like maybe they're using like an enterprise, like a private NPM server, or like some sort of file share at their company for doing it, for storing these packages. And it seems like storing this on like some external CDN or some internal corporate place could make lives for those sorts of situations a lot easier.
Yeah, there's definitely, so we're trying to like walk the line between this, like supporting NPM packages, supporting from a CDN, because there's a lot of work still on the CDN to match full parity. But what's cool about this is that if you just like, it's harder to show an example because we have these like packages, but if we just like got rid of these, got rid of like, don't use NPM to manage your front end dependencies anymore. What Snowpack will do in this world is essentially just load these on demand. So the second it sees React loaded, it's actually not going to look at your node modules. It's going to go and just fetch it itself. So there's no more NPM install process. If you're only working on the front end, you still obviously need to manage your like tooling with NPM. But now we're just loading things as you essentially request them. I guess it's kind of hard to show because your node modules exist here anyway. But in a world where you don't actually have all this tooling set up, it's really clean for early, getting started quick, testing things. And then again, that idea of your install can actually just be a lot simpler because it's not a front loaded thing. It's a thing that happens on demand.
Yeah, it's even having run this show, like we've even joked about like we need to have something that happens on screen during npm installs to like like just some sort of like characters that come on or do something, because it's always like you almost have to have like questions prepared with like, well, somebody's going to show something, well, they're going to install it, they're going to build like a new app, and it's gotten faster. Like it's not as bad as it used to be, but it's still like sometimes painfully slow. It can make experimenting a little bit of a nuisance.
Yeah. It's a really, especially for someone, we all live in a world of like npm is essentially oxygen. Like it is everywhere. It is inevitable. But in someone like a community for Rails or a non-JavaScript focused community, that idea of like reaching into npm and needing npm and Node as a dependency, that's what we're trying to challenge here. Is that for web development, you still need the full suite of npm just to essentially load React, which is a pretty simple package.
Yeah.
That's the interesting idea that we're starting to explore here.
Kirill, do you have anything else? I want to make sure you get a chance to jump in here.
I'm fascinated about this. Actually, a little bit of story time, but last year probably we were looking at PicaCDN, which is now called Skypack. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah, so because of our website, we have more than 4,000 demos, and we didn't want to bundle all of them because it took a lot of time. So we wanted to use the Skypack CDN just so we transform our application code, but not any of the third-party dependencies. So everything that you want once it's on the client, what on demand from the CDN, and hope for caching. And I remember Dan joking earlier that the two hardest things are naming thing and caching validation. Yeah, back on that. So yeah, we were thinking about that. We somewhat failed to do that, but later just implemented Snowpack inside the build and just tweaked it a little bit. So don't bundle the dependencies. And we were using what was the tool? ES install, is that correct?
Yeah, so that's our package handler essentially turned into a library called ES install.
Yeah, this is what changed our game for our website, and just it was the spark of light at the end of the tunnel. So we are using it to install our third-party dependencies as ES modules and just host them so whenever they're needed. But as I see, the Skypack have been really amazing in the last year, so I would just give it a chance and outsource this work to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome to hear. It's one of those things where it's always hard to see how people are using this. But yeah, Skypack is really exciting because it's this idea of just like, right, like I haven't actually visited this homepage probably in a little while, like maybe a couple days, and this is still cached. So it's this idea of like any package from npm by name is loadable in the browser natively. And so you could put something like this code in your application and have some confetti shoot out if you wanted to. And there was no npm install, there was no build tool. You just loaded it by this URL, and this is supported natively in the browser.
I have nothing to say. We're so thankful that you guys are developing Snowpack. And I actually have one question. So you have recently migrated to ESBuild? And
yeah, so our bundler is powered by ESBuild, and our individual file building is powered by ESBuild. We haven't gone full like everything ESBuild, but as the project gets better, we're seeing more and more ways that we can leverage that.
I'm curious, how was the migration from other tool? I believe it was Rollup used previously to ESBuild.
Yeah, so we still see ESBuild has been great for like code that you write. So code that you're writing, it's ESM, it's not going to be CommonJS in this sort of like in this model, right? It's you have full control over it. So if anything doesn't work, you can do things. You have this kind of control and level of almost understanding that you're writing correct ESM code. So ESBuild is great at that. It's like, if you're giving me code that is good, I am going to help you build it really quickly. Where we still see it having trouble is that idea of npm packages just being, not always so good, based on when maybe they're many years old, maybe things have changed. So we're able to use ESBuild for everything except for that one problem. That's where we still leverage rollup, because there's just, I don't even know if it's in scope for ESBuild to support every legacy package. It's kind of anti their whole mission, which is like a really simple tool that has a really well-defined scope and is good at this one thing, which is bundling. So they might get better and better. It's kind of unclear where the line is for them. So that's the one place where we keep using rollup, even though that install step is a little bit slower with it. It is much better to have working code when the install step also is only a one-time cost that you need to pay.
And what would be your advice for the web community about embracing ES modules?
Do it. It's fantastic. Yeah, it's one of those things where I think it just looks nicer to a lot of people. So like it's really pretty well adopted. Like most READMEs I see now assume that you understand the syntax, assume you want to copy paste it. This is certainly not new. I think it was officially standardized in like the 2016 spec, maybe even 2015. So it's like, if you're not using this in your app, I would definitely recommend checking it out, at least coming up with some migration plan, because more and more stuff is going to use this. Tooling specifically, it's like great. So even though the main headline is like this works in the browser, which is super cool. But also for tooling like Snowpack, like this is also analyzable and statically like analyzable. So we can see this file and understand exactly what its dependencies are, exactly what it's exporting. So for tools like Snowpack and even Webpack and older tools, they can still leverage this information and do a lot better job of tree shaking, optimizing. You're just going to get a faster, more efficient app on its own, no matter what tool you're using, if you leverage the CSM syntax.
One thing we didn't get into, but I see like you have an entire like plugin community around Snowpack as well, right? Is that what I was seeing like in the config file as well?
Yeah, we have actually a really cool, catalog here. I think 100 plus. I got to update this number. It's it's more than 100 Snowpack plugins now. Some of these are officially maintained, but plenty of these are more from the community, just different needs that they have had.
And like, how did this? I'm just sort of curious because Dan and I both have some past experience from building like plugin sites. I'm curious like how this came about, and like, do you do anything in terms of managing this, or is this just sort of straight community effort? Like you have some documentation and just leave it on its own?
Yeah, we try to. So we have a pretty good documentation here of like the actual API, and then also a really nice guide for like different examples. So plenty of examples to help you get started, give you kind of basic, things you might want to do something like. Documenting this has really been a priority for us.
Gotcha.
Other than that, I think what we've been figuring out is like, what is the best plugin architecture for Snowpack? So because we were the first to really explore this world of unbundled development, we kind of forged ahead an idea of like, okay, this is how you load a file, and it's one-to-one, and trying to understand like, how do we map a Svelte file to a JavaScript file? Since then, I think there's been a lot more work done to we're now basically what we want to do in the next major release is actually let you plug in other types of plugins. So if there's a ES build plugin that you want to use, essentially just like plug that into Snowpack with minimal changes. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. We have plenty of great plugins, but there's whole other ecosystems that we could be mapping into our build tool if we wanted to.
Yeah, those are really good kind of advice for people that want to do something like this. Is the docs are basically the product. You have good docs, you're going to get users. If you have bad docs, you won't. And anytime you can co-opt someone else's ecosystem or audience, you should totally do that, because that's really hard.
Yeah, we thought we had this technical limitation, which was like, okay, like we're this build tool that like if a URL request comes in, we have to build it. So we need to like not only map source file to destination, but destination to source file. That's gone away. That's not as big of a requirement now. So we're kind of free to choose which ecosystem to join. And I think ESBuild, again, has some pretty clear energy behind it. We're really trying to align with them as much as possible.
Yeah, it sounds like you've used bits and pieces, like good bits and pieces that already exist. And that's kind of refreshing in this world of, I'll just build it myself.
Yeah. I mean, Snowpack would not be half as fast without that project. I mean, it's a really incredible, it's clearly changing a lot about web development, and the fact that we get to leverage that in, ESBuild, I think its scope really leaves open the door for something like a Snowpack to still exist, where they're trying to be the best bundler possible, which is great. But what we're saying is like, even with a super fast bundler, that's still a ton of complexity you don't need. You can live in a world of unbundled development and still get a fast bundled app at the end of the day by only doing that work at build time, not necessarily worrying about how it gets bundled and rebuilding on every change and rebundling on every change your entire app. At a certain scale, even if it's written in Go, that's still going to be somewhat slow.
Yeah, and looking through my notes here, the one topic we hadn't gotten to, and I know I definitely have an interest in this, is what does it look like to have a project and then Snowpack it?
Oh yeah, great question. So kind of migrating from an older project to Snowpack?
Yeah.
And by older, you mean like a non-Snowpack, like
Oh,
a
so yeah.
non-enlightened project.
That sounds really
Legacy
judgmental.
project as it was.
I don't know what the right terminology for like
Nobody does.
like traditional maybe is a better word.
Yeah.
Yeah, like moving from a world of like using Webpack and into a world of using Snowpack. Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends. We actually have a page on this, but it's kind of tough to, where is it? You know what, we used to. No, I'll have to find it. There is a page somewhere here on migrating, but the basic answer is it kind of depends on how much you've changed and how much you've configured within Webpack. Some sites, if you're using Create React App, it was a really early goal to be a drop-in replacement. So there's a couple of little things you need to change, but if you're using Create React App for the most part, it's a one-to-one drop-in with this starter template that I've shown you here. So copy over your source directory, copy over your public directory, and you should be relatively good to go.
That'll catch a lot of people for sure. That's a wide net.
Yeah. I mean, I've built projects in that before and migrated them over. It's the nice thing about the whole Create React App model was like, we actually aren't going to let you do a lot of the dicier things that might actually be kind of like foot guns. Like there's a clear reason that they said like, yeah, don't configure your Webpack and we'll do that for you. And we'll give you this kind of walled garden. So that makes it easier for us to migrate. If you've made a lot of changes, especially during development, that's where it becomes a kind of, well, it depends, right? How much did these changes take you away from what a native browser, like what web development really is at the kind of syntax level? So importing an image and expecting it to come back as a blob of, I don't know, something kind of custom, right? We don't know every plugin. We don't support every behavior that you might have defined.
Yeah. Well, we got a couple minutes left here. I want to give a last call for chat. If you have any last questions about Snowpack or really anything at this point, feel free to chime in. And Kirill, I will also want to give you a chance if you have any other questions to hop in here and ask them as well.
Well, as a final question, I'm curious about what is the future of Snowpack? What can we expect in the next major version, probably? Yeah,
it's always a fun thing to talk about. Really, I'd say like stability and like getting these the API finalized. The JavaScript API was relatively new in the V3 release, and so we're still kind of I'd say hardening and making sure that's the best interface for developing on top of. We really see this being like a tool that anyone can build on top of. So we've seen some great projects using Snowpack internally to power some really opinionated dev stacks. Microsite is a really cool project that is like a Preact site generator that uses partial hydration in a really interesting way, built with Snowpack. There's a couple of others that are using Snowpack internally. So we really want to support that and lean into that story because Webpack is a great product, but it's really about what it enables you to build on top of it. We see Snowpack filling a similar role in the ecosystem. Other than that, a couple of just cool features. That package streaming is something we really care about. Improving bundling, improving how we let you customize and configure the product is really our focus for a V4.
Then I think my last question is from like an open source perspective, is there anything like if people are looking to get involved or help out on, is there any good place to start or anything that you could use help with or any opportunities there?
Yeah, we're always looking for help. We have the repo that I showed, so Snowpack.js or snowpack.dev is our website, has all the links. Our Discord community is awesome. I would definitely say that's a great place to start, say hi and just kind of meet people, ask questions. And yeah, we're really trying to open up the ownership and governance and bring on more contributors is a big focus as well. So not really about the tool, but this has clearly gone beyond the scope of what I can maintain myself. And we're really trying to encourage people, if you have an RFC, if you have something that you want to fix because it's bothering you or a feature that you want to add, we are super open to that kind of contribution as we grow at this stage.
Cool stuff. Well, Fred, this has been awesome. Is there anything that we missed? Any topics that you want to make sure we cover? Have we hit the most important bits?
No, this is great. Thank you for giving the opportunity to share it. I mean, the big takeaway, whether you use Snowpack, don't use Snowpack, is just this idea that build tooling is clearly changing right now. So if you are still using a traditional bundled experience, there's a lot of cool options out there, at least to keep an eye on, because this is clearly not going away. This idea of leaving the legacy code behind and starting to adopt more modern tech. So, I started this project just because I love where this tech is going, and there's a lot of exciting stuff to see when you start digging.
Well, you've got me sold on the speed aspect. I do like getting my own time back.
Yeah.
Yeah. My favorite was the parts that you said were slow and were apologizing for were the ones that I was thinking were fast.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, sorry, that first step was so slow. And I was like, oh man, like
yeah, it's pretty wild. It's really hard to go back. I'll say that. It gives you a lot of time back in your day.
So one thing we like to end with is just any sort of plugs or anything. So I've got the Snowpack GitHub site in there. Is there a good place for people to follow you? Is there any other things you want to plug, any resources, that sort of thing?
No, I think everything on snowpack.dev is for the project, most up to date. You can follow me on Twitter at my name, Fred K. Schott. Talking about a ton of cool stuff. I'm actually demoing a cool new project built on top of Snowpack on Friday. So that would be my little teaser. Like, follow me on Twitter to learn more.
Okay.
It's super subtle, like slide that in there. That's where I mainly am on Twitter.
Cool. I'm dropping those in. Kirill, is there anything you want to plug? Should we plug Kendo React?
We can always plug Kendo React. We're still using Snowpack underneath, but thank you, Fred. Thank you for developing this product. We're really appreciating the work you guys are doing, and it really helped us scale way above our expectations.
Oh, thank you. Really appreciate that. It's a community effort. So we have many contributors that are doing amazing work. So really appreciate you saying that.
And we can make the plug relevant by saying, if you check out the Kendo React docs, you can see those 4,000 demos loading super quickly, thanks to Snowpack. So there you go. Cha-ching,
fun
right?
story. We have one page with 17 demos on it, and it was our benchmark for Snowpack. So 17 demos on a single page, famously named after one of our colleges. So this is the Vladimir benchmark.
Nice. That's great. Yeah, I think the biggest application that we've seen is 55,000 files in an application. So if anyone can beat that, let me know, because I'm trying to create the leaderboard for scaling.
Challenge accepted.
All right. Right on.
All right, Dan, you want to drop your plug?
Yeah, I'll mention the newsletter again, the Enterprise React newsletter. All of our developers submit the articles. In fact, that's how I first learned about Snowpack, and that's why Fred's here regaling us with tales of Snowpack and Skypack today. So subscribe. We never sell your email.
And then as the last thing, I just dropped the React Wednesdays homepage in there. So as I mentioned, we do this every Wednesday. We have fun. I had fun today. I always learn new stuff. So if you're interested, we do it at the same time. We do it every week. We have cool people on, so make sure to check our schedule. But it's super fun. Fred, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Learned a lot. Well, cool. So thanks, everybody. Until next week. See y'all.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.